So I had an idea because I was talking to my writer, Matt, or the writer, I guess, possessive. I was talking to the writer, Matt, about how you even build non-linear conversation. And I started to kind of reflect about the core concepts, and I came up with some really interesting ideas. Or I think I was very excited because I feel like I finally identified, what the problem is, like what the most descriptive way to, describe, what the best way to describe it is. And I was like, oh, this is the problem. This is what I must solve, much better than the nebulous problem that I've been working at for a while. So the problem is telling a story is linear. Our life is linear, and at looking backwards, everything that happened only happened that way. But it could have happened many, many different ways. And in many, sci-fi or, theoretical physics, something like that, you might accept the concept of, infinitely many parallel universes. I think Rick and Morty has an interesting idea with the finite parallel universes. I like that a lot. And I think it makes sense because there, to some extent, would be a limit because, certain variations would be no world, I guess you could say. But, so you've got all these parallel universes, and that is the best description of what you recreate in a dating simulation game in which you can either kind of pass or fail with trying to start a romantic relationship with any number of girls. It can either go well or go poorly, and obviously the combinations of, good and bad moments is part of what it makes it interesting. But ultimately, if there's an end goal that's ending up in a relationship, having them accept you in a romantic way, then yeah, it's kind of win-loss and a lot of complex in between. So parallel universes, you could think of like in a book, the story is, completely linear. One character says something, the other character says the other thing, and then, events occur. And to simulate that in a game where it's truly interactive, you have to allow the player to make those choices, and those choices actually impact the game, but it becomes a huge, content, realistic amounts of content war, because exponentially, if you had every option branch, you start out with, two options, and maybe the girl can react to each of those options two different ways. Using such a system, I think the simplest version of the system is the girl's responses are tied to your choices. So, and I would call that purely linear. So, in a purely linear system, you don't have any choice. Your character, it's kind of like watching a cutscene. Your character says, hey, I think you're beautiful, go out with me. And the girl maybe says yes. That's a purely linear story. That's a purely linear story without any player interaction, really. Now, to introduce the interactive element at its simplest, I believe you move from a linear to a, I would kind of call it bilinear, because I wouldn't call it kind of like, I guess, three-dimensional right away, because I sort of think as linear being like an unchangeable story, like a set-in-stone story that you follow along, being a line. So you could think of it as two dimensions, but I think that if we think about it in dimensions, that might get a little bit confusing. But you could think of it as maybe like a vector. But a linear story is like, a line going forward. You're like reading a bunch of like reading a story. It's kind of like a line. It goes this one way, and there might be lots of twists and turns, but the structure of it is unchanging. Of course, it will always be that way. An interactive element would be, I would call it bilinear, which is basically you have a bunch of linear stories that are all there, and and I think most games that have interactive dialogue choices are this way. They are bilinear in that there are many paths, and you kind of skip back and forth between them. So I guess you could sort of think of it as parallel universes in which you're jumping back and forth between many different versions, and the complexity of the simulation, or I guess you could say the richness just meaning, or depth would be better. So you think of a line going forwards, the degree of depth, quite literally the z-axis. I guess we are getting into 3 dimensions here. If you got a line, going, starting at 0 and going, off to the right, copy and pasting that line in like z depth, so like a bunch of lines stacked next to each other. That's kind of your parallel universes, and that this is how I believe most simulations, will emulate choice by skipping between different options. Now you might say, well, that is what all choices are, is that you choose one of 2 dialogue options fundamentally. Even if there's 6 options, you're choosing one out of other options. You're choosing one option. You can't say 2 things at the same time. You're choosing one option, and then something results from that. And maybe something different would have resulted if you chose a different option. Oh, it stinks really bad. What is that? All right. Yeah, so you choose one option of many, and it's like, okay, that's, interactive. That's a simulation. How would you go a step further than that? Which is what I want to do. I want to take something, and I think one of the problems of that system, I think it's a great system because it works really well at simulating real life, in that if you were to create a real life engine, if all decisions, jump you back and forth between, kind of like an alternate world in which there's a pre-scripted event tied to your choice, you might say, oh, well, that's just like real life. And I would say, actually, no, it's missing an extra element, which is context. So, and I think this is, brings it into a more fluid system, but basically, what you actually want is you want to use those 3 dimensions. So once again, going back to the picture of, you've got a bunch of like sort of arrows that are flying off to the right, starting at 0, flying off to the right, and then you've got a bunch of duplicates of them, or not duplicates, but alternate systems that are flying, and those are represented by different dialogue choices that go off in different directions. So you've got all of those, but for every option you choose on that line, all it can ever do is switch you to a different line, And I think many games will, kind of keep a score, try to, on a single metric. Usually, it's a very common mechanic to give player, violent, non-violent choices. Track that as sort of their moral metric. Like, okay, don't kill anybody, and if you do, we'll kind of keep those points tabbed and give you a happier cutscene at the end if you aren't overly violent. Or in many games, if you're not violent at all, is the only way you can get the reward, which is so a single metric that's outside of the choice system, if that makes sense. Like, it does record your choice system, but that kind of comes back into play. So embracing that idea, but in the middle of the game, for every choice. So the way you do that is, when you make a dialogue choice, it's not hooked directly into the AI's reply, because that essentially makes them a manipulatable robot, which of course they are, but almost obviously to the player, it becomes a memorization system of, if you say the right things, it's like that the meme of that I was looking at the other day, where with all the math and the person thinking, it's just like, what are the correct options to select to end up with like the sex cutscene. And that's completely correct for most games that give you dialogue choices, and some sort of reward for choosing the correct ones is the correct choices are tied to the, cutscenes or the, in-game rewards that you want. Which is not a bad simplification of the system. That's generally, you can still have skill in a system in which the right answers give you the right rewards. But it does completely kill replayability because it's not alive. It's not an alive system. So how do you bring in a live system? Sorry, I've been baiting around this for a while. You make it an alive system. One sec. You can give the system life by creating a process that calculates. So the introduction of the AI personality kind of engine, Electra, is completely fundamental in this. So basically, the idea is, okay, if you tell a girl that she's attractive and that you want to go out with her, or maybe just that you want to go out with her. You tell a girl that you want to go out with her, and you say it, and there's multiple ways to say it, and you say it in the right way. What I believe should happen, or let me start. What normally would happen is that if it's prescripted that answer will end in her going out with you, if that's a possibility, then that's what will happen. But my alternative would be to say, okay, you said it in the best possible way, but the context is that you have a relationship with this person that is built from your previous exchanges with the person. So if you ask a girl to go out, it will take that into account with a lot of factors, such as potentially her mood even of that day. I'm back and forth about the concept of mood. Let's maybe put that to the side for now. It'll take into account your previous relationship with her. So if you've been talking to her every day for like a month in the game, and you had positive conversations and been building that relationship, maybe your relationship on some sort of a scale that tracks all these things and combines them, you're at like a 50 out of 100. So you know a lot about the person and it's gone well, and maybe there's some other factors that impact her attractiveness to you outside of your connectedness and relationship in a mental and emotional sense. But so it takes all these factors into account and then decides what happens. So it's not, it becomes not just about saying the right thing, but saying the right thing at the right time, which of course is real life. How, if you were to reflect on, relationships you got into or relationships you didn't get into and said, okay, if I had said that differently, would that have changed anything? And when I went to ask this girl out, if instead of directly asking her out, if I had said like, oh, I'm going to grab, some food after school, you want to come along, maybe a more informal, indirect asking out, maybe she would have came along and then really had a fun time and completely changed her mind relative to what maybe actually happened, is that you asked her out directly and she was like, oh no, like I'm not looking for a relationship, which might be completely true. But maybe if you invite her to a lower pressure scenario, such as just like, oh, I'm just going to grab food, you want to join? She might be able to relax and enjoy herself and change her mind about her pursuit of not a relationship, her non-pursuit of a relationship. Context is, I think, what would give a dialogue tree system life. So instead of when you say this, she will take off her shirt, it's more so if you say this in the right way and your relationship is this and the context is this. It's almost kind of like you could think of the context as just being the setting. Like if you ask a girl, I'm not sure if this would be a dialogue option, but I want you to take off your shirt. If you were to ask the girl somehow at school that, she would of course say no. that is an alive dialogue system to take context into account. Now, if you're in private and you're dating, then maybe she will do that. So I think embracing that and embracing having a set of variables that the game is aware of, or I think rather a better way to think about it structurally is having the AI character be their own person, simulating them choosing, just like you would simulate an enemy, deciding whether to chase or run away or hide behind cover or charge at you. You want to simulate that aliveness, not just simulate real life by having lots of different possible outcomes that are predetermined. You want to have a bunch of outcomes that are triggered by the right set of, the player's inputs, but also the context. And the context is a accumulation of prior player input. So so it could be said that your first and earliest interactions with an AI are almost deterministic because you haven't accumulated any choices yet. So the way you say something can only go one way because she doesn't know anything about you. Unless there was like some like plot element, like if there was like a big monster, magical, supernatural attack at the school, then maybe that would like switch around all kinds of factors. But even that is a pre-scripted event, most likely. So yeah, there's almost like an interesting gradation of whenever you meet someone, saying things the right way matters the most. Because there's no context yet, because you don't have a relationship yet. So you saying things the right way gets you the best possible reaction always. But as you begin to build that relationship, at least this is the structure programmatically of how I'm designing the system, how I think it would work based on what I'm setting up. The longer you know the person, the less determined, the more context there is with your relationship. And I've thought about even trying to make the conversation feel even more alive by adding future editing, where your conversations going certain ways early on can trigger the AIs to say certain things slightly differently later in reference to previous conversations. I think stuff like that, and trying to come up with a way for the AI to initiate conversations with you, or with you and other people, sort of conflict-prone conversations is another step that I've not nearly begun to build in a feasible sense. But I want to. But yeah, I think that turning the linear system into a truly I don't know what is the difference between linear and three-dimensional. I guess you would say it's spatial, or because I don't think exponential is the right word. But anyways, I think that you don't want a bunch of parallel realities that you're skipping between. You want a simulation of a human brain, which is the AI female characters. You want a simulation of them thinking about what you're saying and then giving an answer that they would give, that based on all the factors that they would go through, that they would give, which is contextual both on who they are as a person and the context of your relationship, which over the course of the game accumulates to the point in which it's really dynamic. It's becomes a true reflection on your relationship. So anyways, I was just really excited about that. I think it was a huge breakthrough in that I realized how to think about, conceptually dynamic dialogue trees. That what I don't want to do is hard assign replies to dialogue choices for the player. So when the player chooses a dialogue, even if they've played the game 1,000 times, they don't know for 100% certain that the AI will reply exactly that way. In fact, this is actually an asymmetric. If we're really trying to emulate true intelligence, or not true, but very deep. A deep sort of intelligence on the part of the AI, what you would do is you would give an extra dimension to all of the AI's responses. So the way that it currently works is, as a player, you have a certain number, maybe let's say 3 different dialogue choices. You can ask her about like, oh, how was your your field trip, or how was your trip to the mall yesterday. You could ask her about that. You could ask her, oh, I like your haircut. do you do any sports? Maybe you have those three options. But within those three options, and this is one area where I'm adding some depth that I think will be really, really fun. Within all those options, there are up to, 4 or 5 different ways that you could say them. So maybe there would be a passive aggressive option for sports, like something like I bet you don't play, or I bet you don't do any sports. Like, do you even do sports, or something like that? Might be one option. Another option could be like, oh my God, do you do sports? Or something like that might be a more friendly or encouraging option. But yeah, so you have all those sort of sub-emotion, the way you say it versus what you're saying. So what you're saying stays the same within all these different emotional options. But the way you say it is another, it's kind of like a sub-choice. The macro is what topic you want to bring up. The micro is how you want to say it. And there's advantages, even for saying things in seemingly negative ways. There are pros and cons to all emotions. And I'll get into that in a later podcast, but yeah, anyways, so I have that. But if I wanted to go an extra step beyond that, so basically, so if you ask her about sports, depending on your relationship and depending on a bunch of things, as I was saying, the context, the accumulation of the relationship, depending on all those factors, she'll select a response. So maybe there's like 3 or 4 different replies that she can choose from. The thing about the AI mind here, the AI character, the female, is going through the context and the way you said what you said to choose, 1 or 3 options. Maybe one is like I'm not interested in talking to you because she doesn't want to talk about that with you because she doesn't know you very well, or like oh my God, or yeah, I'm really passionate about field hockey or something like that. Is another option, and those are sorted by their relative degree of success or positive reaction. Basically, coming to a number about total positive reception of what you said, based on context and how you said what you said, and what you said means. So she's selecting from all of those, but true depth to an AI would actually, within all those success options, there would be sub-options of emotion. So that would be true. So maybe she decides immediately that, or the AI kind of code decides that she really likes you and she really likes what you said and what you asked her about and the way you said it. She's going to pick the 10 out of 10 response. Yes, let's grab coffee and talk about it. I don't know. Maybe that's a 10 out of 10 response if you want to go on a date with a girl. But true depth would be the ability to select a different way to say that on her part. But you can see how that gets exponentially more and more writing, and that's going to be the backbone of any I think great dialogue system is a lot of great writing. But within that, maybe she selects different tones like oh, you care about sports, yeah, I bet you'd hate grabbing a coffee with me later. I don't know, like some other way to say the same thing. But if you could have, and it's not randomization, because once again, it's selecting maybe based on her mood. Based on her mood, she selects a different way of saying the same thing, same outcome. But I feel like that would make it so fluid in a surprising way. I think that would be so fun. But once again, we're multiplying the amount of writing, because you're kind of plugging in a different, slightly different worded response for all of these portions. But I think that would offer a really incredible experience, because so you're working really hard to get the reaction you want. You want to go out on a date with this girl, and you know that this is one of those opportunities because you played the game before. Like this kind of topic about sports, might end up with her going on a date with you. But even when you get a similarly positive response, she might say it in a different way or throw a joke in there depending on her mood. And I just think that simulates life really well. I think that would be really enjoyable to be able to have different conversations on the same topic. It's I don't know. That is very cool to me. But anyways, that was some ideas that I was having today on linear versus non-linear. I guess you could just call it non-linear dialogue branching. And I'm a huge fan of linear dialogue branching. I think you can do a lot of really cool things with it. But something that is a challenge to linear dialogue branching is replayability, because at that point you're trying to max out, or I guess like play out all the different possible branches, which is fun as it's for its own sake, but kind of has a the days are numbered on that, because once you play all of them, then you kind of 100%ed the playability of the game. So then, what's left after that? Whereas if you have an AI kind of, I think like the Electra engine, you have a context calculating, simulating real life system. So, maybe one aspect of that is, when's the fastest I can go out with this girl so that I have the most days to do such and such? Or like, can I get to know these people well enough by this time so that I can do this? But, if I ask her out too early, it makes our relationship more complicated because she rejects me early. And then I have to overcome that because that, leads to her being more cautious of my advances. Like all kinds of dynamic experiences can be driven by context awareness, because context awareness doesn't just mean that you don't know what's going to happen, but it also means that many, many different things can happen from replaying the game, even in a similar way, but in a different way. It's very different. Anyways, those are some ideas. I'm very excited to continue to work on the system. To a lot of it I've already built. What I have not built is the truly non-linear AI responses. Right now, what I've kind of built is I would say a non-linear player choice, but definitely a linear AI response to the non-linear dialogue choice, if that makes sense. So the player can choose what topic and how to talk about that topic, like the way they say it. They can choose the way they say it, which is very non-linear because the AI takes that into account. But after the AI takes that into account, it can only choose from a certain range of options. It cannot choose from sub-options within those options that have different tones. So she can decide to go out with you or not. What she can't decide is, after deciding to go out with you, 3 different ways to say that, depending on her mood or something like that. That is not directly supported. You could add tons and tons of different options, but they would still be ranked by success rather than alternate ways of expressing the same thing, but in a way that has a more dynamic, I guess you could say, alive, based on mood or context or something like that, flair. But those are some thoughts. Thanks, and look forward to talking about more details of Electra soon.